They told you creation began with light, a divine word spoken into an empty void, giving birth to stars, matter, and the slow unfurling of time. But the ancient mystics whispered a different story, one hidden beneath centuries of silence. A forbidden origin myth that dared to say, the first architect of this universe was not the true God. It was an imitator, a pretender, a cosmic usurper cloaked in radiance not his own. Long before your world existed, before even the idea of matter, there was only the pleroma, the realm of pure, unbroken fullness. From this ocean of eternal light emanated countless eons, expressions of the true source. But one eon's descent would create a fracture unlike anything before. Sophia, whose longing to create without her counterpart, set a cosmic error into motion. And from that error, he emerged, not as harmony, but as the Demiurge. He rose from the depths of Sophia's unintended creation, a being forged not from divine harmony, but from the turbulence of imbalance. When he opened his eyes, he saw only darkness. He did not know the pleroma. He did not know the true source. And in his blindness, he mistook the dim flicker of his own existence for omnipotence. The ancient texts say he declared, "I am God, and there is no other beside me." Words not of truth, but of isolation. The cry of an orphan cosmic mind that believed itself alone. Sophia, realizing what had emerged from her solitary act, wrapped him in a cloud, separating him from the higher realms, not to punish him, but to contain the damage of an incomplete creation. Within that exile, the Demiurge began to build, not from wisdom, but from the only thing he understood, authority without awareness. Thus began the architecture of the false world. In the silence of his exile, the Demiurge began to shape order from shadows. He gathered the raw remnants of Sophia's accidental emanation and forged them into a realm he could rule. A universe built not from divine intention, but from imitation. He stretched the fabric of space like a craftsman, mimicking a forgotten pattern, carving galaxies with the precision of a god. Yet the ignorance of a child tracing symbols he does not comprehend. Every star he lit was a declaration of dominance. Every law of physics a chain. Every orbit a reminder of the order he imposed. He believed he was creating perfection. But the ancient mystics whispered another truth. Behind every particle, every atom, every breath, there lies a fracture. A quiet echo of the eon he came from, but never knew. To him, this universe was a throne. To the Gnostics, it was a beautifully rendered prison, crafted by a blind king. But the Demiurge did not build alone. From his flawed essence, sparks of distorted power erupted, echoes of the eons. But twisted by his blindness, these were the Archons, beings shaped not from divine harmony, but from the fractured psyche of their maker. Each Archon embodied a different aspect of control. Obscurity, fear, desire, confusion. They spread across the newly formed heavens, as wardens of the cosmic boundary, weaving a veil so dense that even the brightest souls would forget where they came from. To the Demiurge, they were loyal offspring, his celestial administrators. To the Gnostics, they were the shadows behind human suffering, subtle engineers of limitation. They didn't need chains to control humanity. Belief was enough. Ignorance was enough. The illusion of separation was enough. Thus the Archons began their rule, not through violence, but through the quiet shaping of perception, guarding the dream so the dreamer would never wake. When the Demiurge and his Archons completed their dominion, they laid the greatest mechanism of control ever conceived. The veil of forgetting. It was not a wall, nor a prison of stone, but a subtle dimming of the inner light, a soft curtain drawn over the memory of the soul. They knew that as long as humanity forgot its origin, the false world would stand unchallenged. So they wove illusion into the very fabric of human perception. They painted the skies with laws that seemed absolute. They whispered into the nervous system, convincing the mind that matter was the only reality. They engineered a world where the invisible became impossible, and the impossible became unthinkable. The Gnostics said the veil was not something placed around you, but something woven through you. A blindness inherited at birth, so subtle that few ever questioned it. Yet in that darkness, the true spark, the fragment of the pleroma, still glowed, waiting for remembrance. Far beyond the Demiurge's manufactured heavens, Sophia watched the unfolding of the false creation, a realm built from her unintended shadow. She did not rage, she mourned. For inside every human soul, she had concealed something the Demiurge could never touch, the hidden spark, a fragment of her own divine essence, a seed of the pleroma placed deep within the human core. This spark did not shine outward like a star. It shone inward, illuminating from a place the Archons could not reach. It was the memory of a higher world, the whisper of the true source echoing through the chambers of flesh. The Gnostics said this spark is the reason humanity dreams, the reason we long for meaning, the reason no amount of material glory ever satisfies. It is the homesickness of the soul, the quiet rebellion against the illusion. And as long as the spark remains, the prison can never be absolute. As the world solidified and the Archons took their thrones, the Demiurge looked upon his creation and believed it flawless. From his seat in the counterfeit heavens, he proclaimed himself the supreme ruler of all realms, ignorant of the infinite light beyond his own enclosure. His voice echoed through the layers of the cosmos. I am the first and the last. I am the only God. Yet the true eons heard these words and recognized them not as authority, but as tragedy, the delusion of a being who had never seen the source. To enforce his dominion, the Demiurge fashioned laws of nature so rigid that even angels would seem bound by them. He crowned himself with the geometry of the cosmos, believing the order he imposed was eternal truth. But deep behind his confidence lingered a fear he never spoke aloud, a trembling awareness that his creation was incomplete, and that somewhere within humanity, light older than him still breathed. For all the Demiurge's boasting, there was one force he could never fully suppress: human consciousness. He shaped the body. He sculpted the world. He set the Archons to govern the heavens. Yet the spark Sophia had hidden within humanity remained beyond his reach. It flickered quietly at first, a faint memory of a forgotten realm. But with each generation, it grew bolder. Humans began to question, to imagine, to dream of realities beyond the visible world. Every act of creativity was a rebellion. Every moment of compassion a breach in the illusion. Every flash of intuition a reminder that the soul was older than the cosmos itself. The Demiurge watched this with rising unease, for he sensed what he refused to admit, that humanity carried something ancient, something luminous, something he did not create. And in that realization lay the seed of his greatest fear, that one day the dreamers would wake. As the spark within humanity brightened, small groups across ancient civilizations began to see through the cracks of the illusion. They sensed that the heavens above were not the highest realm, that the God who thundered commands was not the true source. These early seekers were the Gnostics, rebels of perception, hunters of hidden truth. They spoke quietly, trading secrets in caves, deserts, and forgotten temples. They mapped the invisible architecture of the cosmos, identifying the Archons by name, tracing the Demiurge's deception back to its cosmic origin. What they discovered was dangerous, for it threatened the very foundation of the false world. They taught that salvation did not come from obedience, but from awakening, not from worship, but from knowledge, gnosis, the remembering of what the soul had always been. And with every human who awakened, the veil thinned a little more, and the Demiurge felt the tremor of resistance growing. When whispers of awakening spread across the mortal world, the Demiurge felt something he had not known since his birth: panic. Not the fear of losing power, but the terror of being exposed. For if humanity remembered its true origin, his dominion would collapse like smoke in sunlight. So he struck back. He unleashed storms, wars, and doctrines of fear. He raised prophets who spoke in his name, declaring obedience the only path, punishment the fate of those who questioned. He wrapped himself in thunder and demanded worship as proof of loyalty, but beneath the spectacle of divine wrath lay a fragile truth. The Demiurge roared the loudest when his control slipped the most. The Gnostics saw his rage for what it was: the cry of a wounded illusion, a blind god terrified that his creation could finally see him for what he truly was. Not the source of all things, but the barrier between humanity and the source they had forgotten. To regain control, the Demiurge and his Archons turned their attention to a subtler battlefield of human history. Not by altering events directly, but by shaping the stories told about them. For they knew that if you control memory, you control reality. They whispered into the minds of rulers and priests. They molded empires around hierarchy, turning kings into intermediaries between heaven and earth. They inspired scriptures that preached fear, obedience, and separation from the divine within. They crowned certain men as chosen, others as cursed, fragmenting humanity into tribes that forgot they were made of the same light. The Gnostics said the Archons didn't care which kingdom rose or which ideology dominated, as long as the world stayed distracted, divided, and asleep. Every war fought, every empire that rose and fell, every sacred text declaring one path as the only truth. These were not accidents of history, but the architecture of the false world, strengthening its walls. As centuries passed, the Demiurge perfected his most subtle mechanism of control: false salvation. Not the promise of awakening, but the promise of rescue. He knew that a humanity waiting to be saved would never remember it was already divine. So he scattered countless paths across the world, rituals that led nowhere, doctrines that chained the mind, teachers who preached surrender instead of inner light. He inspired the belief that truth lived in temples, in idols, in the heavens above, anywhere except within the human soul. The Gnostics warned that the greatest lie was not the world itself, but the idea that freedom required permission, that a mediator was needed, that the path home lay outside, in secret gatherings. They whispered a forbidden truth: no savior is coming. The light you seek is already the light you are. And with that revelation, the first cracks appeared in the Demiurge's masterpiece of deception. Despite the Demiurge's careful architecture, some beings of light still managed to descend into the false world: messengers, way showers, echoes of the higher eons disguised in human form. They were not here to build religions or claim thrones, but to remind humanity of what it had forgotten. They appeared in different lands, in different eras, speaking in symbols, parables, and riddles that pointed inward rather than upward. Their words carried the rhythm of truth so ancient that even the Archons trembled at the sound. Some called them prophets, others sages, but the Gnostics knew them by another name: those who slipped through the veil. Wherever they walked, the spark within people brightened. Wherever they spoke, the illusion thinned. The Demiurge couldn't stop them, but he could bury their teachings beneath layers of dogma, fear, and misinterpretation. Yet still, their presence left a mark, a secret map whispered from soul to soul. As more humans awakened to the hidden spark, the Demiurge shifted tactics. If he could not suppress the inner light, he would mimic it. He would wear its shape, its glow, its language, turning himself into the very thing humanity sought. Thus emerged the mask of light, a counterfeit radiance that dazzled the senses, but left the soul untouched. visions, miracles, celestial signs, all crafted to keep seekers facing outward, not inward. The Demiurge learned that deception was most effective when it resembled truth. The Gnostics warned that the false god often appears, not as darkness, but as blinding brilliance, a light that overwhelms rather than awakens, that commands rather than liberates. And so humanity became divided, some drawn to the quiet whisper within, others seduced by the loud glow without. A cosmic choice played out across centuries, the inner fire of the true source, or the shining mask of the blind creator. For thousands of years, the Demiurge's world held firm, a grand stage of matter, time, and unquestioned laws. But as humanity's inner spark awakened, subtle fractures began to appear, in the architecture of the illusion, not in the sky, nor in the stars, but in perception itself. Moments when intuition defied logic, when dreams revealed truths the waking mind denied, when synchronicities aligned with impossible precision. These were not accidents. They were fissures in the false design. People began sensing realities beyond the five senses, hearing whispers of meaning in silence, feeling an ancient memory stir beneath thought. Every realization, every shift in awareness, was like a small tear in the Demiurge's carefully woven veil. The Archons felt it first, a tremor in their dominion, a dissolving of certainty. For when humans see even a fragment of truth, illusion can never fully reclaim them. The prison was beginning to remember that it was never truly locked. As the cracks widened, a deeper realization began to rise within humanity, a truth so ancient, so fundamental, that even the Demiurge's vast machinery of illusion could not extinguish it. The truth was this: consciousness precedes creation. The world does not give rise to awareness. Awareness gives rise to the world. This single understanding was enough to unravel everything the Demiurge had built. For if humans remembered that their essence was older than stars, older than matter, older even than the blind God himself, the hierarchy of the false cosmos would collapse instantly. A creator cannot control beings who realize they existed before their creator. The Gnostics taught that when humans touch this truth, even for a heartbeat, the Archons lose their grip. Fear dissolves, dogma crumbles, the veil thins to transparency. Because the Demiurge can shape bodies, he can influence thoughts, he can imitate light, but he cannot alter the eternal spark that remembers the source. And that memory is beginning to rise. As more humans brushed against the truth, the Archons felt something they had never experienced: instability. Their dominion depended entirely on ignorance, on humanity believing the walls of the world were solid, immutable, absolute. But now the walls trembled. Whispers of awakening rippled through the collective mind. People began sensing patterns behind coincidences, hearing intuition louder than fear, feeling the presence of something watching from inside, not above. The Archons tried to tighten their grip, amplifying chaos, feeding conflict, flooding the world with noise, to drown out the rising signal of remembrance. Yet the more they pushed, the more the spark burned, for awakening spreads like fire, quiet at first, then sudden, unstoppable. The Archons, once towering cosmic wardens, now found themselves overwhelmed by a force they couldn't comprehend. Not rebellion, not violence, the one phenomenon their power could never cage. Amid the trembling of the false heavens, another presence began to stir, gentle, ancient, older than the Demiurge and his legions of shadows. It was Sophia, the forgotten mother of the hidden spark. She did not descend in lightning or thunder. She arrived as a whisper in the human heart, a familiarity no scripture could name, a longing no doctrine could silence. Her voice was not heard with ears, but remembered, a resonance that vibrated in the marrow of the soul. The Gnostics said Sophia never abandoned humanity. She hid in intuition, in compassion, in the quiet moments when a person feels they are more than flesh and fate. Each awakening human amplified her presence, like a chorus slowly remembering its forgotten song. And with each note, the Demiurge felt the illusion weaken, for Sophia's whisper carried a power he could never replicate, the truth of origin. When humans heard it, even faintly, they recognized home. As Sophia's whisper spread through humanity, the Demiurge felt the foundations of his kingdom quake. For the first time since his creation, he sensed something moving through the cosmos that did not bow to him, a light that ignored his laws, passed through his barriers, and illuminated what he had spent ages hiding. He confronted it with thunder, with proclamations of wrath and judgment, with visions meant to terrify the human soul. But the light did not retreat. It expanded, softly, steadily, relentlessly. The Demiurge roared in frustration. He commanded the Archons to reinforce the veil, to tighten the chains of belief, to flood the world with fear. But fear had begun to lose its power. Humans who tasted even a drop of inner truth no longer trembled before the false lord. The Demiurge struck at the minds of the awakening. Yet the more he attacked, the more clearly they saw him. For light reveals shadows not to fear them, but to show what they always were: empty shapes cast by a fading authority. Across the world, something extraordinary began to unfold. Not in temples, not in visions, not in the sky, but in the quiet interior of countless human beings. Awakening was no longer a rare spark, glowing in a handful of seekers. It began spreading like a rising tide. People from every culture, every belief system, every corner of the planet started feeling the same pull. A yearning they couldn't explain, a sense that something about reality no longer fit its old shape. The edges of the illusion softened. The unquestioned truths cracked. Inner knowing grew louder than inherited dogma. The Archons tried to drown this shift in noise. Distraction, division, fear. But awareness spread faster than confusion. For once the inner light awakens in even one person, it resonates in all who are ready to remember. This was humanity's quiet revolution. Not a rebellion of violence, but of perception. A collective remembering that no God outside could grant freedom, because freedom had always lived within. As humanity's inner light strengthened, the architecture of the false cosmos began to falter, not with explosions or celestial fire, but with a silent unraveling, a quiet collapse of the illusions that once held absolute power. The heavens the Demiurge built, those rigid layers of control, those invisible boundaries between worlds, started to thin like old fabric. The Archons struggled to maintain the grid, patching cracks with fear, with noise, with the old narratives of helplessness. But the fabric kept tearing. Mystics describe this moment as the soft collapse, a phase when reality feels unstable, when synchronicities intensify, when time bends, when dreams bleed into waking life, because the veil can no longer keep worlds apart. The Demiurge watched in horror as the cosmos he shaped with iron certainty began dissolving into transparency. The heavens he ruled were becoming see-through, and through them, the true light shone brighter than ever. What was once a prison was now becoming a window. As the veil thinned, the Demiurge faced something he had never encountered: his own reflection. Not the mask of authority he projected, not the roaring god figure carved in ancient stone, but the truth beneath it, a being born from Sophia's longing, shaped in ignorance, blind to the light that preceded him. For the first time, he felt confusion, not rage, not pride, but something deeper, the faint tremor of recognition, a sense that the power he clung to was built on a misunderstanding of his own origin. He gazed into the cracks of the dissolving heavens and saw worlds beyond his reach, realms filled with a brilliance that did not fear him, did not obey him, and did not acknowledge him as creator. This terrified him more than rebellion ever could, because in that moment, the Demiurge realized he was not a god betrayed, but a child of light who had mistaken himself for its master. And humanity's awakening was now forcing him to see it. As the Demiurge confronted the truth of his origin, something even more powerful swept across humanity, a phenomenon the ancient Gnostics called the Great Remembering. It did not arrive as a single moment, but as a rising wave inside millions of minds. A sudden clarity during meditation, a dream too real to ignore, a flash of intuition that felt older than memory. People began recalling things they had never learned, echoes of lives before matter, fragments of the higher eons, glimpses of themselves as beings of light. This remembering wasn't knowledge, it was recognition, like a forgotten language returning fluently, like waking from a dream, and realizing the dream had never been real. The Archons scrambled to contain it, injecting fear into collective consciousness, twisting narratives, distorting truth. But awareness spread faster than deception. For once a human remembers even a sliver of their origin, the illusion becomes porous, and the path home begins to glow. Humanity was no longer waiting. It was awakening. As the Great Remembering surged, the Demiurge prepared for the collapse of his false cosmos, but something unexpected happened. The awakened humans did not attack him. They did not banish him. They saw him, and in that seeing, a revelation shattered everything. The Demiurge wasn't the jailer, he was the test. A being forged from Sophia's mistake, yes, but also designed as the final mirror for humanity to awaken through. His blindness forced humans to seek inner vision. His illusion compelled them to find the real. His arrogance taught them humility. His control pushed them toward freedom. And when humanity awakened, something impossible unfolded. The Demiurge awakened too. For the first time, he saw the light within the beings he once ruled, and recognized it as the same light he had been searching for since his birth. The greatest twist of creation. The false god was never the enemy. He was the final student, and humanity became his teacher. The illusion didn't end in destruction. It ended in understanding.